Welcome to Topical Economics. If you are new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss any of our insightful videos on key economic concepts. In today's video, we're diving into the topic of international specialization. I'll be walking you through some past paper multiple-choice questions, carefully analyzing each one to explain why the correct answer is what it is. Whether you're preparing for exams or just want to strengthen your understanding of economics, this video will help you get to grip with important concepts in a clear and practical way. So, let's get started. Starting with the first question. When are countries most likely to specialize and trade with each other? A. When the cost of transport between them is high. B. When there are large differences in their resource allocations. C. When they have access to the same technology. D. When they have high tariffs and other protective measures. Reference, 2022 May-June version 3. The correct answer for this question is option B, when there are large differences in their resource allocations. Countries are most likely to specialize and trade with each other when they have different endowments of resources, whether that's natural resources, labor, capital, or technology. This difference creates comparative advantage, where each country can specialize in producing goods and services it can produce most efficiently, and then trade with others to obtain what it produces less efficiently. The other options are less likely to lead to trade and specialization. Option A, when the cost of transport between them is high, discourage trade because they make it more expensive to exchange goods between countries. Next, option C, when they have access to the same technology, if countries have same access, their production capabilities are likely to be similar, which reduces the need for trade based on comparative advantage. Lastly, option D, when they have high tariffs and other protective measures, it typically reduces trade by increasing the cost of imported goods and encouraging self-sufficiency. Moving to question 2. International companies have made substantial investments in computer production in India. India is now a major center of the world computer industry. Profit margins are high since labor costs are a tenth of those in the US. What does this suggest is the reason for companies locating in India rather than in the US? A. Access to cheap land. B. Availability of capital investment. C. Availability of investment funds. D. Competitive wage rates. Reference, 2022 February-March version 2. The correct answer for this question is option D. Competitive wage rates. The key detail in the scenario is that labor costs in India are a tenth of those in the US, which suggests that companies are motivated to locate in India primarily because of the low cost of labor. This allows them to reduce production costs significantly while maintaining high profit margins. Analyzing the other options which are less relevant. Option A, access to cheap land. While land costs might be lower in India, the primary driver here seems to be labor costs, not land. The description focuses more on labor costs and the computer industry, where labor, especially skilled labor, plays a key role in production. Next, option B, availability of capital investment. While capital investment is important, the scenario doesn't mention it as a primary factor. The emphasis is on lower labor costs, which is why companies are choosing India. Lastly, option C, availability of investment funds, could be a factor in some cases, but the scenario specifically mentions that labor costs are much cheaper in India, which suggests that wage rates are the main reason companies are choosing India for their operations. Moving to question 3. Why can specialization cause economic growth? A. Specialization can allow a country to produce many different goods and services. B. Specialization can lead to a reduction in average costs of production. C. Specialization can mean that firms in a country will face diseconomies of scale. D. Specialization can reduce a country's need to depend on other economies. Reference, 2021 October-November version 1. The correct answer for this question is option B. Specialization can lead to a reduction in average costs of production. Specialization allows firms or countries to focus on producing goods or services that they are most efficient at, which leads to economies of scale. As they produce more of a particular good or service, the average cost of production typically falls due to factors like increased efficiency, more skilled labor, and better use of resources. Lower production costs can increase profitability, improve competitiveness, and promote economic growth. Analyzing the other options. Option A, specialization, can allow a country to produce many different goods and services, is not typically the case. Specialization involves focusing on a narrower range of goods and services that a country or firm can produce most efficiently. The goal is to concentrate resources and skills in specific areas, rather than producing a wide variety of goods. Next, option C, specialization can mean that firms in a country will face diseconomies of scale. Diseconomies of scale refer to the point at which a firm becomes too large and starts to experience increasing average costs due to inefficiencies. Specialization, on the other hand, generally helps firms achieve economies of scale, not diseconomies, by allowing them to focus on producing a specific set of goods more efficiently. Lastly, option D, specialization can reduce a country's need to depend on other economies. While specialization increases efficiency, it often makes countries more dependent on others for goods and services that they don't produce. This interdependence is a key reason why countries trade with one another. Moving to question 4. A country specializes in the production of steel, toys, and textiles. What is a disadvantage of specialization for the country's workers? A. They cannot afford to buy products from other countries. B. They could become structurally unemployed if global demand changes. C. They have to learn a variety of skills. D. They have too much choice which wastes their time. Reference, 2021 October-November version 2. The correct answer for this question is option B. They could become structurally unemployed if global demand changes. Specialization in particular industries, such as steel, toys, or textiles, can make a country's workforce highly dependent on those industries. If global demand for these goods decreases, due to technological changes, shifts in consumer preferences, or global economic downturns, workers in those industries may face structural unemployment. This occurs because the skills workers have developed may no longer be in demand, and they may need to retrain or relocate to find new jobs in different sectors. Looking at the other options. Option A. They cannot afford to buy products from other countries, is not a typical disadvantage of specialization. In fact, specialization allows countries to trade for goods they do not produce efficiently, which often makes products from other countries more affordable, not less. Specialization generally encourages trade, not isolation. Next, option C. They have to learn a variety of skills. Specialization typically reduces the need for workers to learn a wide variety of skills. Instead, workers often become highly skilled in specific tasks related to the industries they are working in. This is an advantage in terms of efficiency, though it can have drawbacks if the worker's skills become too narrow. Lastly, option D. They have too much choice which wastes their time, is not a relevant disadvantage in the context of specialization. Specialization typically reduces the variety of goods produced within a country, which can make decision-making easier, not harder. The issue of having too much choice would be more of a consumer concern rather than a worker's issue. Moving to question 5. Malaysia and Indonesia specialize in the production of palm oil. What is a disadvantage of specialization? A. Concentration of labor in the activity in which it is most productive. B. Creation of jobs to meet world demand. C. Reliance on trade with other countries for other goods. D. Rising palm oil prices. Reference, 2021 October-November version 3. The correct answer for this is option C. Reliance on trade with other countries for other goods. Specialization in a single industry, such as palm oil production, can lead to a dependency on international trade for other goods and services that the country does not produce as efficiently. While specialization can increase productivity in the sector where a country has a comparative advantage, it also means that the country may not produce enough of other essential goods, like food, technology, or consumer products, and will need to import these goods from other countries. This can make the country vulnerable to changes in global trade dynamics, such as price fluctuations, trade disruptions, or shifts in global demand. Analyzing the other options. Option A, concentration of labor in the activity in which it is most productive, is not a disadvantage. In fact, specialization typically leads to more efficient use of labor by focusing on the activity in which the country is most productive. It increases overall productivity and output in that sector. Next, option B, creation of jobs to meet world demand, is generally considered an advantage, not a disadvantage. As countries specialize in producing goods for global markets, they often create jobs to meet the demand, which can boost employment in the specialization sector. This is beneficial for workers in the industry. Lastly, option D, rising palm oil prices, may be a result of changes in global demand or supply factors, but it is not inherently a disadvantage of specialization. In fact, higher prices can benefit the countries that specialize in palm oil production, as they may earn more from exports. Moving to question 6. What is a disadvantage of increasing international specialization? A. Consumers pay higher prices for goods and services, reducing their welfare. B. Domestic firms may be uncompetitive, leading to structural unemployment. C. Domestic firms may experience rising costs as they pay more for imports. D. Resources may be used less efficiently as domestic firms face less competition. Reference, 2021 May-June version 1. The correct answer for this question is option B. Domestic firms may be uncompetitive, leading to structural unemployment. As countries increasingly specialize in certain industries, domestic firms that do not have a comparative advantage in those industries may struggle to compete both domestically and internationally. This lack of competitiveness can lead to structural unemployment, as workers in less competitive industries find their jobs at risk. They may not have the skills needed for the more competitive sectors, requiring retraining or relocation to new industries, which can be a costly and time-consuming process. Analyzing the other options. Option A, consumers pay higher prices for goods and services, reducing their welfare, is generally not a disadvantage of increasing international specialization. In fact, specialization allows countries to focus on producing what they are most efficient at, which often leads to lower prices for consumers as countries trade for goods they do not produce as efficiently. Specialization tends to lower the overall cost of production, benefiting consumers through cheaper goods and services. Next, option C, domestic firms may experience rising costs as they pay more for imports, could be a concern if there are disruptions in global supply chains, but increasing specialization typically leads to lower import prices for goods that a country does not produce itself. The primary benefit of specialization is that countries can exchange goods more efficiently, which usually results in a reduction, not an increase, in costs. This makes option C less likely to be a direct disadvantage of increasing specialization. Lastly, option D, resources may be used less efficiently as domestic firms face less competition, is not generally a disadvantage of international specialization. While it's true that competition can drive efficiency, specialization usually leads to greater efficiency as firms concentrate on their areas of comparative advantage. Moreover, competition is often still present on the global scale, which keeps firms in specialized industries efficient. In some cases, domestic firms may actually become more efficient because they focus on a narrower range of activities. Moving to question 7. What is a disadvantage of increased specialization by a country? A. It becomes more reliant on imports to meet all its needs. B. It reduces the potential for international trade. C. It results in access to a greater variety of goods for consumers. D. It results in lower costs for home-produced goods. Reference, 2020 May-June version 2. The correct answer for this question is option A. It becomes more reliant on imports to meet all its needs. Specialization means a country focuses on producing the goods and services it can produce most efficiently. While this improves efficiency and productivity in those specific industries, it can also lead to increased reliance on imports for goods and services that the country does not specialize in or produce efficiently. For example, a country that specializes in agricultural production might rely on imports for technology, consumer goods, or other manufactured items it doesn't produce itself. This dependency on trade for a variety of goods can be risky, especially if global trade conditions change, e.g., tariffs, trade disruptions, or supply chain issues. Analyzing the other options. Option B. It reduces the potential for international trade, is not true. In fact, specialization increases the potential for international trade. By specializing in what a country does best, it can trade those goods with other countries that specialize in different sectors, leading to greater international trade, not less. Next, option C. It results in access to a greater variety of goods for consumers, is an advantage of specialization, not a disadvantage. Specialization allows countries to focus on producing the goods they are best at, and by trading with others, consumers gain access to a greater variety of goods from around the world at lower prices. Lastly, option D. It results in lower costs for home-produced goods, is an advantage, not a disadvantage. Specialization tends to lower the cost of production for the goods that a country focuses on. It allows firms to benefit from economies of scale, increased efficiency, and a more skilled workforce in the specialized industry, ultimately leading to lower costs for home-produced goods. Moving to question 8. What is the most likely disadvantage of international specialization? A. Decreased levels of global output. B. Increased average production costs. C. Increased productivity levels. D. Overdependence on other economies. Reference, 2019 May-June version 2. The correct answer for this question is option D, overdependence on other economies. One of the most significant disadvantages of international specialization is that it can make countries overly dependent on other economies for goods and services that they do not produce themselves. When countries specialize, they often concentrate their resources on producing specific goods or services in which they have a comparative advantage. While this boosts efficiency and productivity, it also means that they may need to rely heavily on other countries for products that they no longer produce domestically. This creates vulnerability if there are disruptions in global trade, e.g., trade wars, supply chain disruptions, or changes in demand. Such overdependence can expose a country to economic risks if the global trading system is unstable. Analyzing the other options. Option A. Decreased levels of global output. Specialization actually tends to increase global output, not decrease it. By specializing in what each country does best, overall efficiency improves, and countries can trade goods they don't produce themselves. This leads to a more efficient global economy and a higher level of output. Next, option B. Increased average production costs. Specialization typically leads to decreased, not increased, production costs due to economies of scale and more efficient use of resources. By focusing on a smaller range of products or services, countries can streamline production, increase productivity, and reduce average costs. Lastly, option C, increased productivity levels, is generally considered an advantage of specialization. By concentrating on what they do best, countries can improve productivity and produce more with fewer resources. Specialization leads to efficiency gains and higher levels of output, so increased productivity is usually a positive outcome, not a disadvantage. Moving to question 9. The table shows the rice yield in 4 countries. What may be concluded from this information? A. Bangladesh and Thailand produce the same amount of rice. B. Japan produces more than 3 times as much rice as Bangladesh. C. Japan produces the largest amount of rice per hectare. D. Japan produces the largest amount of rice per person employed. Reference, 2018 May-June version 1. The correct answer for this question is option C. Japan produces the largest amount of rice per hectare. According to the table, Japan has a rice yield of 64 kilos per hectare, which is the highest yield among the 4 countries listed. This means Japan produces the largest amount of rice per hectare of land compared to the other countries. Analyzing the other options. Option A, Bangladesh and Thailand produce the same amount of rice, is incorrect. Both Bangladesh and Thailand have a rice yield of 20 kilos per hectare, so they produce the same amount of rice per hectare. However, the statement could be true in terms of yield, but it doesn't add much additional insight beyond the data already provided. Next, option B, Japan produces more than 3 times as much rice as Bangladesh, is incorrect. Japan's yield is 64 kilos per hectare, while Bangladesh's yield is 20 kilos per hectare. 64 divided by 20 is equal to 3.2, so Japan produces about 3.2 times as much rice as Bangladesh, not more than 3 times. This makes the statement close, but not completely accurate because more than implies an amount larger than 3.2, which is not the case. Lastly, option D, Japan produces the largest amount of rice per person employed. Conclusion cannot be drawn from the table. The table only provides data on rice yield per hectare, but it does not contain information about the number of people employed in rice production. Therefore, this statement is not supported by the data. Moving to question 10. What encourages international specialization? A. A foreign exchange shortage. B. Diseconomies of scale. C. Free trade. D. Quotas. Reference, 2016 October-November version 2. The correct answer for this question is option C. Free trade encourages international specialization because it removes barriers to trade, such as tariffs, quotas, and subsidies, allowing countries to focus on producing goods and services in which they have a comparative advantage. When countries can trade freely, they can specialize in the production of certain goods and exchange them with other nations, which enables more efficient global resource allocation. This leads to higher productivity, lower costs, and increased overall economic welfare. Analyzing the other options. Option A. A foreign exchange shortage typically hinders international trade, not encourages it. If a country does not have enough foreign exchange, it may struggle to pay for imports or to engage in international trade, making specialization more difficult. In such cases, trade barriers might be imposed or countries may try to reduce imports, rather than specialize. Next, option B. Diseconomies of scale refer to the point at which a firm or industry becomes too large, and its per-unit costs start to increase due to inefficiencies. This is more of a limitation to growth rather than a factor encouraging specialization. Specialization typically allows firms or countries to achieve economies of scale, not diseconomies, by focusing on a narrow set of goods and producing them more efficiently. Lastly, option D. Quotas are restrictions on the amount of a particular good that can be imported or exported. Quotas reduce trade rather than encourage it, as they limit the ability of countries to exchange goods freely. This can hinder the benefits of specialization, since countries cannot access as many goods from abroad or may be discouraged from specializing in certain products due to trade restrictions. Moving to question 11. What is most likely to encourage international specialization? A. Similarities in climate in different countries. B. The ability to produce products more cheaply than other countries. C. The discovery of oil in a country that had no oil before. D. Very high international transport costs. Reference, 2015 October-November version 1. The correct answer for this question is option B. The ability to produce products more cheaply than other countries. International specialization is primarily driven by the principle of comparative advantage. If a country can produce a good or service more cheaply, i.e., more efficiently, than other countries, it will have a comparative advantage in that area. This gives the country an incentive to specialize in producing that good, which can then be traded with other countries that specialize in different goods. This leads to an efficient allocation of resources globally, as each country focuses on what it does best and trades for the rest. Analyzing the other options. Option A. Similarities in climate in different countries can make it easier for countries to produce the same types of goods, e.g., agricultural products. Specialization is typically driven by differences in comparative advantage rather than similarities. For instance, countries with different climates can still specialize in products that they produce most efficiently, even if their climates are not exactly the same. Next, option C. The discovery of oil in a country that had no oil before may boost a country's ability to specialize in oil production. This is a specific event rather than a general factor encouraging specialization. It could lead to a shift in specialization if a country gains a new resource, but it is not a universal reason for international specialization. Specialization is more typically driven by ongoing comparative advantage rather than a one-time resource discovery. Lastly, option D, very high international transport costs generally discourage international trade and specialization. If it's expensive to move goods between countries, it reduces the incentives to specialize and trade because the costs of exchanging goods can outweigh the benefits of specialization. High transport costs can act as a barrier to trade rather than encourage it. Moving to question 12. What is an advantage of international specialization? A, choice is limited. B, countries become overdependent on each other. C, resources are used more efficiently. D, transport costs are decreased. Reference, 2015 May-June version 1. The correct answer for this question is option C, resources are used more efficiently. One of the main advantages of international specialization is that it allows countries to focus on producing the goods and services they are most efficient at, using their resources, labor, capital, land, in the best possible way. By specializing in certain industries, countries can take advantage of comparative advantage, which leads to better resource allocation and higher overall productivity. This increased efficiency benefits both the countries involved and the global economy. Analyzing the other options. Option A, choice is limited, is not an advantage of international specialization. In fact, specialization can increase choice for consumers, as it allows countries to focus on producing what they do best, and then trade for the goods and services they don't produce as efficiently. The result is often a greater variety of goods available to consumers at lower prices. Next, option B, countries become overdependent on each other, is a disadvantage, not an advantage, of international specialization. As countries specialize in certain sectors, they may become reliant on imports for goods they do not produce. This interdependence can create vulnerabilities if there are disruptions in global trade, such as changes in demand or trade barriers. Therefore, this is not an advantage. Lastly, option D, transport costs are decreased. While international specialization often leads to lower production costs, it does not necessarily decrease transport costs. In fact, international trade and specialization might sometimes increase transport costs due to the need to ship goods across longer distances. Specialization encourages countries to trade goods, but this does not automatically lead to a reduction in the costs of transporting those goods. Moving to question 13. What is most likely to result from an extension of specialization in manufacturing? A, for the consumer, some prices will be reduced. B, for the country, there will be less dependency on international trade. C, for the employee, the work will become more varied. D, for the producer, there will be less efficiency. Reference, 2015 February-March version 2. The correct answer for this question is option A, for the consumer, some prices will be reduced. One of the primary benefits of extending specialization in manufacturing is that it allows countries or firms to focus on producing goods that they are most efficient at. This leads to economies of scale, where the cost per unit of production falls as output increases. As a result, prices for consumers tend to decrease because manufacturers can produce goods at a lower cost, which is passed on to consumers through lower prices. Additionally, specialization often encourages competition, further driving down prices. Analyzing the other options. Option B. For the country, there will be less dependency on international trade, is not likely to be the case. In fact, extending specialization in manufacturing tends to increase a country's dependency on international trade, not reduce it. As countries specialize, they typically produce more of a narrow range of goods, leading to greater need for imports of goods they do not produce themselves. This creates more reliance on trade with other countries. Next, option C. For the employee, the work will become more varied, is unlikely. Specialization in manufacturing often means that workers will focus on repetitive, narrowly defined tasks related to the specific part of the production process they are responsible for. As a result, work becomes less varied, not more, as workers become increasingly specialized in particular tasks to improve efficiency. Lastly, option D. For the producer, there will be less efficiency, is incorrect. One of the key benefits of specialization is that it increases efficiency. When producers specialize, they can streamline production processes, reduce waste, and improve productivity. This leads to greater efficiency, not less. Thank you for watching this video. I hope the explanations of past paper questions and the reasoning behind the correct answers helped clarify some key concepts. If you found this video useful, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Topical Economics for more insightful lessons and exam tips. Your support is truly appreciated, and it encourages me to keep creating valuable content to help you succeed. Feel free to leave any questions in the comments, and I'll be happy to assist. Thanks again for being a part of the Topical Economics community.